welcome again to another podcast episode on Talk Architecture with your host, Naziaty Muhammad Yaacob. And continuing on the topic of, in the context of architecture, how to turn failure into success. This is part 3, and this part I'm going to give my opinion based on my own self as an example. You may not know it, but I have failed a million times before. And how did I keep on going and change myself in order to be relevant until I retired and after retirement as well right now? So, Talk Architecture Podcast is a testimony that I could succeed even after retirement. And how did I kept on going even though I had earlier setbacks, even though I was rejected several times when I was a student, applying for scholarship, and also when I transitioned from school to employment. So I would argue here in the beginning that I chose to be an educator out of, shall we say, choice rather than a fallback. I could be in practice full-time if I wanted to, and I did get offers to be the director of design in a design and build company in the year 2000 at the age of 38. And I have chosen to teach full-time rather than teach part-time, as there are a lot of architects out there or architectural designers and graduates who actually contribute their time at universities and schools of architecture throughout in Malaysia, where I am in. And their interest in education, as you can see, is to be able to give themselves or their experiences with the students. You can see that there is this belief. I mean, in architecture culture, we see that the brainstorming of ideas and giving opinion is something that is crucial to the sustain or activity of architecture as a profession. Okay, we get back to the topic now. We're talking about failures. And in general, from experiences that I hear and research on, there's always some critical moments, and the transition between graduating and employment is always a crucial time. So for some people, maybe it's smoother than they imagine or smoother than they thought, but for many people, it sort of make them reflect the big idea or the purpose of their life, actually. And there's also that time after entering into profession that if you get into the wrong company or work environment, you could easily quit architecture. Now, digging deep into that, the belief that you had before is crucial at that point. And if you did not really fancy architecture in the first place and thought about something else while you were a student even, you could easily go into a different pathways. Now, when we talk about architects, we talk about, often we envision somebody in practice, going into the route of licensed architect and taking in jobs and having clients and having an office and working in an office, maybe as a partner, collaborating with others. and getting jobs, obviously, in a niche area, maybe designing private residences, or being in a company where you are focusing on certain building types for multinational companies and big money clients. So it's often that architects are a servant to society, i.e., property developers and government agencies, because yes, as a servant or somebody who is servicing this industry, in this industry, which is a construction property development, the architect plays that role of collaborator, plays that role of getting the job done and getting the client satisfied with the work done, and maintaining cordial or important friendly relationships with all. So the architect is not like a lawyer or a doctor, in a way that it's part of an industry. So this is an important thing to note before we discuss anything else. But the graduate architect, entry-level, mid-level architect, which may also face stress and burnout symptoms and may reconsider quitting architecture, is also there. And the senior architect, somebody own a company, they might opt out of owning a company or providing the services that they normally have and doing something else. So this is kind of like in different contexts of the profession and the growth of the person who was trained as an architect. They have different problems, and we can go and dive into those problems in detail in future episodes. But for this concluding episode, for part 3, it's necessary to actually provide a guidance, or provide first the scenario of what's happening, and then the guidance of how to deal with failures and how to be successful. The topic that is, please bear in mind that there will be several short videos that I will do on this, but for this part 3, it'll be the usual half an hour video. So the scenario is that we talk about in part 2 about the architectural community and how important there need to be support for the individual. The architectural community could be online groups, chat groups, or like Reddit, which I mentioned earlier, or Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, and not even intimate WhatsApp groups. Could be Telegram groups and all sorts of online chatter out there. And when one poses questions, one might not necessarily get sympathetic ears and emphatic communication. One might get much more, shall we say, attacks or criticism. So not a lot there in terms of getting guidance and mentoring that you seek to have. Often if an architect or architectural designer in the industry face problems in the workplace, they feel lonely. They feel like there is no place to complain in the real life, and not necessarily in the online community. So can they go to institutions like the Institution of Architects in the country? Can they go to associations that seems to provide support for architects? And sometimes they just go to non-architectural associations and even helplines and counseling and therapy. But they can't really get that guidance. So this is the void that is out there in terms of how to negotiate all these failures. It could be that there are several or quite a number of failures in one's architecture career life, starting from education. So that's why we always go back to education later. But before that, in part two, the importance of the architectural community and associations or institution would create a nurturing environment in which this would help with how architects are perceived in society and how you need to deal with it within the profession. So what does society view architects to be like? Do they see value in the work that architects do? Do they see any difference between architects and the other members of the construction industry? So often they do know that the architect is a designer and straddle between arts and sciences, and they provide the services like interior designers and others who are under the word design, designers per se, that are trained particularly in taste and style and how to negotiate the built environment, in this case, to design and build a building. And in general, that's what society view architects as, providing that services. And they see that, it could be very expensive to engage an architect. Sometimes they opt out for non-architects to do that. And a lot of architects sounded out or are critical of this situation in their country where other people have taken their job. Now, this is another issue. But in the architectural profession itself, we see that society view the architectural profession, yes, I mentioned just now. Then others in the construction industry also view the architects and how they work with the architects. So there's common denominators of opinions that they have, such as how fresh graduates would work and how they would want to deal with the senior associate and how they would not deal with designs that are not be able to be built or crazy designs, and they would deal with the tender documentation and how whether the architect has strayed from that. I mean, the consultants know of each other's work. So the architect knows what the engineer should be doing, and the quantity surveyor and planners and so on. And they know each other's work and how they know that they're in the same boat in the construction industry. And then we have the property development players, who are people who engage with property development. Obviously, they are the developers, and there are profits to be made because there's a lot of money to be made in property, obviously, and they even have the in-house architect to look after the interests in terms of the agenda for architecture. So for property developers, which are usually the big ones that I mentioned just now, having architects in the companies working with them help to ensure that targets that they're going to have. It could be the issues of environmental and climate change and ESG, environmental social governance, which is linked to sustainable development agendas. And these are points, or these are things that they communicate to public that they're interested in working with, because the public also do value properties that embraces all these environmental and social goals. And also who view the architecture profession, we have also the educators, those in education. It could be people who are non-architects, but mostly schools of architecture that exist in faculties that may not be just architecture, could be other professions in the construction industry as well, including town planning. So this viewing of the value of the architect and how they think the architect need to be, or how the architect role is kind of like a crucial thing, because it affects the culture, the architectural culture. And in order to change anything at all, just say there's lack of work-life balance in architecture profession, you are needed to work long hours because that's the nature of the architecture profession. So this culture has been made throughout the years, and you can see from movies about architects, and you can read about them, or you yourself being an architect, you have gone through all this, where in some companies they demand you to work after 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and without pay, of course. So if it's with pay and you consent to that, then there could be, shall we say, a mutual agreement for you to work late hours. But normally the culture is you work hard for the company, you want to have the best design out there for the client, and the, shall we say, the briefing is at 5 p.m. in the evening, and just about you're thinking about going home to work and what to do, and suddenly your boss came and said, we need this to be done by tomorrow evening. And there you go, having to stay back. So that is fair or not fair, and who is thinking about that right now is another whole lot of debate. But in general, my opinion is not fair, really. So we see this individual. Now we have case-by-case basis, and different individuals, no two individuals are the same. And how do they change their failures into success? When the rejection comes, just say you did not manage to finish the work in time, or the work is not up to standard. As someone who is trained in architecture, and as someone who's worked at the practice, one would know the standard to be achieved. And when one shows to the boss, or to be delivered the work done to the consultant, it is with the utmost quality in terms of it does the job that's needed to be done to make the project move forward, obviously. If one has the time, one could impress people, but to impress people is not the objective here. But to actually get the job done as required by the brief set out earlier is what is number one. Now, people normally would be understanding or sympathetic to the job demands. Of course, there could be one or two clients who demand more, who expect more, who even think the value for money is higher than what the architect is thinking about. So in general, if you want more, you got to pay more, right? So in this environment where you are the boss, you could be managing well, or you could be managing as best as you can, or you could be managing poorly, and it may affect your team. So the individual, if they are in the team, they could be the entry-level graduate, not being able to perform as well as they should. So they decided that architecture, or they are thinking about deciding that architecture is not for them. Although they have passed architecture school and they're working, they're still thinking that this is not something that they would want to do, because little pay and yet too much work is not something that they like. But some of them struggle for a few years and finally make the breakthrough maybe they get their license, maybe they get to work at a company that is more accommodating to what they need. So failures could happen anytime. It could be a rejection. You can find a better company, but failures can play on your mind. And in a stretch from being a graduate to working after 5 years, after 10 years, after 15 years, and so on, if you're still in it after 5 years, you might be thinking architecture is for you. But for some, maybe in the first few years, you might go into graphic design or product design or management, construction or something, which some of them are actually something that is fine because maybe you're not really cut out for the design office, or you're not going to go through the traditional way of being an architect. So failure are those failures. So some of the questions is that how you see your self-worth, how you are aware of what's happening and seeing yourself worthy or not of the job is kind of crucial. There could be a point where it will be good to see a therapist, obviously, but getting the right mentoring and getting the right sort of attitude to be surviving in the architecture industry is crucial, obviously, because you can't really change the culture. The culture has been entrenched. I mean, it has been established. How it is that architects, like I said just now, how does society view the architectural profession? And I said something about the property developers and the market demand that the architect be a certain sort of consultant for them, knowing the style, knowing a signature design, knowing the way they work and how they can work with others. So they gave confidence for the clients to engage with the architect. So the architect has to play the part, and the culture is created by the architects themselves. The interesting thing is that architects themselves can change the culture. They can demand for better time and better work scheduling with the client or with others. They could go through the institution and demand for such better way of managing their work. But if the architects do not want change to the culture that they have created, then the brunt of it goes to the individual who has to deal with the office environment and office politics. There are several things that could come up. The use of technology, the changes in technology, how you do a report, the soft skills of how you approach people and interact with people, and how you able to keep a balance. How do you maintain your boundaries in terms of relationship and not be taken advantage of? How you would, there are a lot of things to juggle when you are in the architecture company, because there are different individuals working as well. And it may not be the greatest place on earth in terms of you may feel your heart done by with office politics, for example. So the individual looking at failure is an individual, shall we say, individual belief of failure. Like I said just now, there's no such thing as failure. You just learn and you make mistakes and you move on, because you're not a failure. And why do we keep thinking about failure? Is because people in a toxic environment or because of office politics would be critical of you, and it will be suggested to you that you're not up to it or not worthy of the job, and imply that to you that you are a failure. And you yourself, or they did not really say that, but when you were in architecture school, or when you were being mentored, or you are in an environment where you're talking with other peers, the word failure is being equated with certain things that you do not have, like certain skills, certain knowledge, certain soft skills, or certain way of dealing with your bosses or the other consultants and clients. So do you have time to do all that? So is it forgiving? Is it a nurturing and forgiving environment? Now, obviously, as an individual, you need to go and address yourself, because there could be no one. It could be a lonely, no one to help you, and there could be a lonely path to take, and being alone and trying to resolve this matter. It's not that, shall we say, it's not that comfortable, and dealing with your emotions and all that. People say that you cannot show your emotion. I mean, the 48 laws of power, for example, where there's a lot of, by Robert Greene, there is a lot of research done on how people obtain power and what is power like, and how you actually have to deal with your boss and how to make them look good and stuff like that. But there's also other factors and other laws, which one of them is the idea that you need to not be vulnerable. You're not to be seen as being weak. You're not to be seen as emotional. And if your character is like that, where you could be emotional, they would look at it and say, this person can't take it. And that culture is toxic, and that culture needs to be changed. But you can't change it because you're in it. Say you find a good architecture company which allows for a nurturing environment and a sort of positive way and attitude and listening to you, your needs and wants, and you get the job done in a peaceful and calm manner and in a harmonious environment. That's what we all want. But why are there still a lot of grouses out there? Why are there still a lot of conflicted situations out there in which people still have to engage with? Because there's no agency, or the institution can't really monitor these things and can't really say anything to the architecture company, because it's part of society. Whatever politics that is played in the company is within that private company, which is created by the boss and people who are, shall we say, the boss right-hand man or right-hand woman, or people that the boss want things to happen in that company. So delicately negotiating yourself in that company is one of the things that you need to do. Now, when you are rejected, you need to actually do pause a bit and not really embrace the uncomfortable feeling that's happening to you at that moment. These things happen anywhere, at any time, and in an office environment, it can happen where suddenly you're being rejected for some reason. Maybe the drawing is not good enough, or your work performance is not up to scratch. Taking that on board at that point, how you deal with that with your body emotionally is crucial. We're not talking like, I don't want to show emotions. No, it's okay to show your emotions. I mean, apologize if you say something that is, that you need to say sorry for, but don't apologize for something that is not your fault. The point is, you felt uncomfortable and you want to learn from it. But how you receive that news at that time, don't put it in your body. Don't embrace it. Just put it outside of you and just let it stay there. That pain could be whatever feeling that is, the feeling of uncomfortableness. That pain will disappear eventually. The way you think about yourself is the most crucial thing in order to turn failure into success. Because what is failure? Failure is just a perception that this person is not cut out for the job. And that perception can change. And that's why we're talking about the culture. Talking about you yourself, thinking about yourself, and how you can accept what is happening there, but it's not going to eat you alive. It's not going to be absorbed in you, where years down the line, you're going to feel yourself a failure again and again. Those processes from the beginning that you receive the rejection, you saw it and you put it in the clouds. You put the pain in the clouds, you put it in somewhere else other than you, and then you move on, learn from that and move on. And also, another rejection happens, another failed things happen, and often it's not your fault. Often it's a collaboration between you and another consultant or the client, or, often it's also to do with you did not learn the right things in the School of Architecture. You did not learn things that is necessary for you to face failure in the School of Architecture. Or you have never failed in the School of Architecture because they gave you good grades because they don't want anybody to fail. So you never actually tasted failure. But I'm talking about the transition part where you're the graduate architect at entry level. So we're looking at this case study. And having to have that particular mindset where you could take that rejection, that bad news, that criticism, and the pain is not to be absorbed by you, but place it out there, away from your body, and learning from the mistake. That's not me. And I know that there are a lot of factors that was involved, and I'm not to be blamed, but I need to move on from this because it's no use dwelling on this. So shrugging off those things, that so-called mistakes and so-called rejection or so-called failures that has happened at that time, and the mentality to put them away is how you're going to recover and how you're going to be successful eventually. That in a nutshell is what it's all about individually, but it's not that easy. And it's not only during that spur of the moment, that moment in time, or that hour where you need to cope with it. It's to do with the whole day, the next day, the whole week, the month of feeling that failure or feeling that moment where you failed. And that needs other things to come as well in terms of the morning and the night routine, in terms of how you manage your subconsciousness. And after this, I will give a series of episodes on how to be in control and having the power from your subconsciousness, and how to strengthen yourself using self-awareness, meditation, and being mindful of what's going on in an office culture and what people may be doing to you directly or indirectly, and how to cope with it. The day-to-day is important. When we think about our past life and the failures that we had, how we shrug it off and how we move forward, how we try to find a way through, I would recall that I try to make it positive in a way that I don't reject those people that I was rejected from. In a way, it's same as saying you can actually work with your enemy. And there is perspectives of friends. If they are not really friends, why be with them? And these are things that are really important because you're out there in the work environment and you're not sure this is going to be trustful person. How are you going to do it? But in general, not trusting people is not good as well, but trusting them to a certain level is what is needed to be done, or trusting them with a bit of a doubt. Because people are fallible, people could make mistakes themselves. And this is quite temporal. So being in that balance is how you need to be every day, every week, every month, every year. And being in that balance is also the crucial thing about taking your failures and making it a success. Having that control from your subconscious mind is the main thing actually, and how to actually tap into your subconscious mind and utilize that rather than overthink, overstress, and think about what people say all the time. So there is that balance that's needed to be done in you in order to get the balance to achieve all the things that you want from your profession, the architecture profession, which is a good profession, very nourishing to do with the creativity and aspects as well. And even though it could be mundane at parts, the architecture is a good profession to be in. Thank you very much. We will move along and listen to the next podcast.